They were childhood best friends turned almost lovers. Then he disappeared, until the day he walked back into her life. Now old wounds, new love, and one unforgettable promise collide. Willow Ridge, Colorado had always been the sort of place where life felt a little slower, a little kinder. Mornings were crisp even in the summer, carrying the scent of pine needles and wet soil. The mountains loomed like ancient guardians around the town, casting long shadows across the rooftops at dawn. To most people, Willow Ridge was a place you passed through on the way to somewhere bigger, somewhere louder. But for Julian Carter, it was both sanctuary and cage. At 15, Julian already carried the quiet refinement expected of a Carter, the wealthiest and most influential family in the region. He wore crisp button-down shirts to casual events. He spoke softly, with an almost old-fashioned politeness. He never raised his voice. He always held the door. Yet beneath all that careful grooming and expectation, Julian was simply a boy who loved building things. Tiny engines, improvised catapults, mini solar cars. Anything that let him escape the suffocating future the Carters laid out for him. That summer, his mother insisted he join the Willow Ridge Community Youth Program, saying it would build character. In truth, it was to keep him occupied and away from unproductive hobbies, before enrolling him in yet another elite preparatory course. Julian expected nothing from the program. But then he met Mira Lane. The community center buzzed with the chatter of teens and preteens awkwardly mingling on the first day. Some kids sat in circles, others clung to the walls. Julian stood off to the side, hands shoved in his pockets, studying the laminated schedule posted on the bulletin board. A voice beside him said, "You look like you're trying to decipher a treasure map." He turned. Standing there was a girl, maybe 12 or 13, with messy dark hair tied back in a lopsided ponytail. Her jeans were splattered with dried paint, and a smudge of graphite streaked across her cheek like war paint. She blinked at him with huge amber-colored eyes that seemed to hold more imagination than most adults he knew. Is something on my face?" she asked. "A little," he said honestly. She wiped her cheek with her sleeve. "Better. Now it's just smeared," he replied. She snorted. "Good. I hate looking too put together. People expect things when you look polished." He didn't know why, but his chest warmed at that. She was unexpected. "I'm Mira," she said. "Mira Lane. Julian Carter." "Oh." Her eyebrows shot up. Carter? He braced himself for the familiar change in demeanor. People always acted differently when they learned his family name. But Mira just shrugged. "Okay. Cool name. Cool. No envy. No forced friendliness. No flattery. Just a shrug." It was the most refreshing reaction he'd ever received. During orientation, the coordinator announced a spoken-word performance that would mark the end of the youth program. Participants were randomly paired. Julian didn't expect anything. He never did. Until his name was called, paired with Mira Lane. She pumped her fist, eyes glittering like she'd just won a prize. "Yes, we're gonna have fun." Fun was not usually part of Julian's vocabulary, but something about her made the word seem possible. Their assignment: co-write a spoken-word piece about dreams and identity. Mira immediately pulled out a sketchbook, its pages worn and bursting with ideas. "Okay," she said seriously. "Tell me every dream you've ever had." Julian blinked. "Like career dreams?" "No." She waved her hand. "The weird ones. The ones that make no sense. Like when you dream you're a flying turnip. That kind of dream." Julian stared at her. "I've never dreamed of being a turnip. Not yet. Give it time." His laugh escaped before he could stop it, a small, surprised bark of amusement. And Mira beamed. Over the next few weeks, they met nearly every day to rehearse and brainstorm. At first, their collaboration was clumsy. Julian's writing was formal and precise, while Mira scribbled messy, poetic lines that sometimes sounded like fairy tales. But gradually their words intertwined. His structure, her imagination. His quiet stability, her explosive creativity. After each rehearsal, Julian insisted on walking Mira to Moonbeam Cafe, the little coffee shop her father owned. The cafe was small and cozy, filled with mismatched chairs and the warm smell of pastries that always seemed freshly baked. Mr. Lane, a sturdy, gentle man with salt and pepper hair, greeted them every afternoon. "Mira, sweetheart," he'd call out. How was rehearsal? Great, she answered every time, even on the days she struggled with lines. And you must be Julian, Mr. Lane said on their first meeting. Thank you for walking my girl home. Julian nodded politely. It's no trouble, sir. From then on, Mr. Lane always prepared a warm cinnamon roll for Julian. On the house. Mira would sketch while Julian studied. She drew everything, mountains, people, animals, abstractions, but most often she drew him. You really don't need to, Julian protested once. I want to, she said, voice soft. You have interesting eyes. Interesting. Yeah, they're kind, but also sad. Julian didn't know how to respond. No one had ever looked at him long enough to notice something like that. One chilly September afternoon, they sat on a bench behind the cafe. The mountain air was sharp, and leaves rustled like whispers around them. Mira showed him a sketch, him smiling, him serious, him looking up at the mountains. You make me look more confident than I really am, he said quietly. You are confident, she replied, as if it were an obvious fact. Not really. You just don't know where you're allowed to be confident yet. Julian stared at her, stunned. Mira Lane seemed to see things other people didn't. Things he hid even from himself. On impulse, brave, foolish impulse, he said, You're my mountain queen. Mira froze. What? He swallowed. Sorry. That was stupid. I don't know why I said. No, she interrupted, cheeks warming. It wasn't stupid. It was nice. She mustered a shy smile, and something fluttered between them, something young, fragile, and new. But not everything was warm and innocent. The Carter family was not thrilled. While Julian spent more time at the community center and the cafe, his parents grew increasingly distant and increasingly critical. His mother's words dripped with polite disdain. That girl is talented, yes, but her background. Julian, you must consider appearances. His father was worse. You're wasting valuable time with these frivolous activities. Julian didn't argue. He couldn't. Years of quiet obedience had trained the fight out of him. But he still walked Mira home every day. Still rehearsed with her. Still let her call him out on his awkward line deliveries and overly dramatic pauses. With Mira, he felt like someone real. 2 weeks before the final performance, the Carter parents made their announcement. Silvergate City's top engineering preparatory program, prestigious, exclusive, borderline impossible to get into, had accepted Julian for their year-long immersive course. Classes started in 5 days. Julian knew he hadn't applied. His parents had done it in his name. The message was clear. His place was not in Willowridge. His place was not with Mira. His place was with the Carters in the world they chose for him. His mother said gently, This is an opportunity of a lifetime, sweetheart. His father added sharply, And it begins with letting go of childish distractions. Childish distractions. Like the girl who believed in him. Like the only person who saw him. Julian felt sick. That night, after dinner, he slipped out of the mansion through the back door and ran. Actually ran, for the first time in years. He reached Moonbeam Cafe breathless. Mira was already outside, standing beneath the golden porch light. You're leaving, she said softly, eyes glistening. I heard your dad talking to Mr. Fincher. Julian's chest tightened painfully. Mira, I don't want to go. You have to, she whispered. It's your future. No, he said fiercely. My future is. He stopped. He couldn't say it. Not out loud. Not yet. But Mira already understood. Her voice broke. You don't have to promise anything. But Julian reached for her hands and held them tight. Tighter than he had ever dared. I'll come back for you, he whispered. No matter how long it takes. I swear it, Mira. Her breath hitched. Tears fell silently. Then, for the first time, they embraced, not as partners or friends or children, but something in between. Something that trembled with possibility. They clung to each other like the world might disappear if they let go. And then Julian left. The next morning he was gone. Silvergate City swallowed him whole. And though the mountains stood unchanged, nothing in Willowridge felt the same. Silvergate City swallowed Julian whole. In the beginning, he counted the days by how often he remembered her. Every morning, Myra's laugh would pass through his mind like the echo of paintbrushes tapping jars, or the way she wrinkled her nose when trying to shade a portrait just right. He'd picture her at the Moonbeam Cafe counter, sketchbook open, charcoal smudges on her fingers. He'd see her at the community center, humming under her breath as she practiced lines. But days turned into weeks, then months. And the mountain air of Willow Ridge, the pine resin, the crisp coldness, the smell of steamed cocoa, was slowly replaced by the metallic hum of Silvergate, the sound of maglev trams, the glare of neon screens. At Carter Preparatory Engineering Institute, everything was structured, polished, relentless. Students competed. Instructors observed like hawks. Schedules were carved so precisely there was no room for sentiment. Phone privileges were limited. Computer access monitored. Personal correspondence discouraged. Julian wrote Mira dozens of letters anyway. Most never left his dorm. He tucked them inside a narrow metal box beneath his desk, each one an attempt at holding on to something warm in a world that seemed determined to freeze him solid. I saw a painting today that reminded me of you. I think I solved the fuel pressure module because of something you once said. I don't know who I'm supposed to be without you. None of them felt worthy of sending. And when the year-long program extended into an internship, and then into a university track, then a corporate entry position, Willow Ridge felt farther and farther away, like a childhood dream half remembered upon waking. Still, he never loved anyone else. His co-workers called him the quiet one, the focused one, the Carter heir who doesn't date. Silvergate City adored him for his brilliance. Youngest engineer to lead an atmospheric launch project, the prodigy groomed to take over Carter Aerospace. But at night, when the city lights flickered like artificial stars, all Julian could think of was a promise whispered under a porch light years ago. A promise he had never broken. A promise he had never fulfilled. By the time Julian Carter turned 29, he was a polished product of the Carter dynasty. Sharp suits. Controlled expression. Eyes that rarely softened. His apartment sat atop a gleaming tower that overlooked Silvergate's skyline, the kind of place most people only saw in glossy magazines. But it felt hollow, too large for one person, too cold to call a home. His parents saw pride when they looked at him. The public saw a rising star. His colleagues saw ambition. But inside, Julian felt like a man boarded up from the inside, each wall built by expectations he'd never agreed to. He couldn't even remember the last time he had held a paint-scented sketchbook in his hands, or tasted Mr. Lane's cinnamon hot chocolate, or walked under pine trees without a schedule dictating when he could breathe. Then, 3 weeks before his 30th birthday, something unexpected happened. He dreamed of Mira. Not a memory, those came often, but a dream so vivid he could still smell her shampoo when he woke. In the dream, she turned to him at Moonbeam Cafe and said, "If you don't come back now, you never will." He woke with tears on his pillow. He hadn't cried in years. Something inside him cracked, quietly, like the first fracture in a frozen lake. And that was enough. He packed a single duffel bag, grabbed his keys, and walked out of his penthouse without telling anyone. Not his assistant. Not his parents. Not the board. Not even the partner he had been assigned for the upcoming launch project. He drove for hours. Miles of highway blurred beneath him. The mountains rose in the distance like sleeping giants. The horizon shifted from city glare to the soft blue of open sky. By the time Julian reached Willow Ridge, he felt raw, unarmored, human again. The Moonbeam Cafe looked exactly the same. Same vintage lights. Same hand-painted sign with an outline of a crescent moon. Same golden porch light where he had held Myra's hands for the very last time. But the town felt different. Not smaller, just quieter than he remembered, like it had been holding its breath for 15 years. Inside the cafe, Mr. Lane stood behind the counter wiping down mugs. His hair was whiter, his frame a little more stooped, but his eyes were still the same warm brown Julian remembered. Eyes that had once watched him walk Mira home with a mixture of caution and fondness. When Julian stepped inside, the bell chimed. Mr. Lane looked up. For a moment, confusion flickered. Then realization. Recognition. Shock. And then something that looked dangerously close to hope. "Julian Carter?" Mr. Lane whispered. Julian swallowed hard. "Hi, Mr. Lane." Mr. Lane stared at him as if seeing a ghost. "Good Lord. Last I heard, you were practically running the aerospace industry." "Not quite," Julian murmured. "Well, you sure dress like it." Julian cracked the smallest smile. Force of habit. A beat of silence. Then another. until finally Mr. Lane asked the question that mattered. "Are you here for Mira?" Julian exhaled. "Yes." Mr. Lane nodded slowly, then gestured for him to sit as though preparing him for impact. "I'll tell you where she is," he said gently. "But I should warn you, she's not the same girl you left behind." Julian's chest tightened. "I didn't expect her to be." "She grew up fast," Mr. Lane continued, voice low. "Life made sure of that. She runs the Willow Ridge Creators Hub now. Ever since the old community center shut down, she's been keeping the arts alive for every kid in town." Of course she had. Mira always saved the world with pencils and kindness. "Is she happy?" Julian asked, barely breathing. Mr. Lane gave him a bittersweet smile. "She found her purpose. That doesn't mean she found her peace." Julian nodded. He deserved that blow. "Go to the art center," Mr. Lane said. "She's usually there until dusk." Julian stood. His palms were sweating. When had he last felt nervous like this? "Mr. Lane," he said quietly, "thank you. For everything." The older man's expression softened. "Son, she never hated you. Not once. She just learned how to miss you without breaking." Julian's throat burned. He left before he could fall apart right there in Moonbeam Cafe. The Creators Hub sat on a little hill overlooking the willow-lined creek. The building was modest, painted in cheerful blues and greens, but the front windows were covered with children's artwork. Watercolor mountains, crayon animals, papier-mâché suns. Julian paused at the entrance. "She's in there. 15 years of distance. 15 years of longing. 15 years of unspoken promises." He pushed the door open. Inside, laughter echoed. Paintbrushes clattered. Children darted around craft tables with the kind of wild joy only freedom can produce. And there, at the center of chaos, stood Mira. She was facing away from him, hair tied up in a loose bun with 2 brushes stuck into it like accidental ornaments. Her shirt had smears of blue paint across the sleeves. She was showing a little girl how to blend colors on a canvas, her voice patient and soothing. Julian froze. He felt 15 again. Awestruck. Breathless. Undone. Then the girl Mira was helping looked up and pointed. "Miss Mira, someone's here for you." Mira turned. Her brush slipped. Her breath caught. Her eyes widened with such sharp, unshielded emotion that Julian felt it like a physical blow. For a full 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Then Mira whispered his name. "Julian." He stepped forward. "Hi, Mira." She pressed a hand to her mouth. It trembled. You came back," she breathed. "Yes," he said softly. "I finally did." Her eyes filled, not with the tears of a child this time, but with the ache of a woman who had waited too long for something she no longer dared believe in. And just like that, the world seemed to shift back into alignment. For the first time in 15 years, Julian felt the earth beneath his feet. And for the first time in 15 years, Mira Lane felt the future open. Just a little. Silence stretched between them, thick, trembling, full of 15 years of things unsaid. Behind Mira, the children continued painting, oblivious to the earthquake occurring in their teacher's chest. But Julian couldn't look away from her. He was terrified that if he blinked, she might vanish, like a memory dissolving in morning light. Mira slowly lowered her hand from her mouth, but her expression was unreadable. Half relief, half disbelief, and something wounded beneath it. "Julian Carter," she whispered again, as if tasting the name. "I thought you'd become an astronaut by now." "I didn't." His voice cracked softly. "I just became lost." She stared at him for a long moment, long enough for him to fear she'd ask him to leave. Instead, she exhaled shakily. "Come outside with me?" Julian nodded, heart pounding. Mira turned to the kids. "Everyone, keep working on your pieces. I'll be right outside, okay?" They nodded, all at once. A chorus of chaos resumed behind them. Mira wiped her hands with a towel, though the paint still stained her sleeves, and led Julian out the back door to a small patio overlooking the creek. The late afternoon sun cast warm gold across her hair. Pine trees whispered in the breeze. Julian had forgotten the sound, forgotten that Willow Ridge had its own language. He stood there, absorbing it, absorbing her. Mira crossed her arms, not defensively, but like she needed to hold herself together. "You really came back," she murmured. "I did. After 15 years. Yes." Her voice barely rose above a breath. Why now? Julian swallowed. He had prepared for engineering panels, executive presentations, billion-dollar launches. But this question, this small, quiet question from a girl he once promised everything, was the one that unraveled him. Because, he said slowly, I couldn't keep pretending anymore. Silvergate became a cage. And every time I thought about what mattered, I found myself thinking of you. A gust of wind carried the faint scent of pine and acrylic paint. Mira looked away toward the creek, blinking hard. Julian, she said, voice thick, I waited a long time. Longer than I want to admit. He stepped closer. Not too close. Just enough that she could feel the sincerity pouring off him. I'm sorry, he whispered. She closed her eyes, letting the words settle. But when she opened them again, there was something steadier there. Not forgiveness. Not anger. Something in between. Resolve. How long are you staying in Willow Ridge? She asked softly. Julian thought about his penthouse, his unnotified assistant, the Carter Aerospace Board probably losing their minds over his sudden disappearance. However long it takes, he said. I didn't come here for a visit. Her eyes flicked over him, his suit, his leather gloves, the polished city-sharp look of a man who had lived either too carefully or too obediently. You didn't come here dressed for Willow Ridge, she said with a faint, humorless laugh. No, Julian admitted. But I came here honest. Mira looked at him for a long, silent moment. Then she did something that broke him just a little more. She smiled. A small smile. Fragile but real. Then we should sit, she murmured. It's a long story, what happened after you left. Julian's breath shook. I want to hear all of it. They sat on the small wooden bench beneath a willow tree. One that hadn't been there 15 years ago, but seemed to have grown solely to witness this moment. She didn't speak at first. She looked at the creek, watching the water shimmer as it flowed under the slatted bridge. When you left, she began cautiously, I didn't know how to be angry with you. I wanted to be. But you didn't choose it, you were taken. Julian clenched his jaw. I should have fought harder. You were 15, she said gently. Your parents controlled everything. He had no argument. After you left, I kept going to Moonbeam Cafe with my sketchbook. For a while, I half expected you to walk through the door, just like you used to. Julian's chest ached. He let her words wash over him. Then the community center shut down when the funding ran out, Mira continued. Willow Ridge didn't have much for arts programs after that. Kids needed somewhere to go, somewhere to learn. So eventually, I started helping out. Teaching. Volunteering. She smiled a little. I figured if I couldn't go to art school, I'd bring art to everyone who couldn't go either. Julian felt a surge of admiration so strong it rattled him. And the Creators Hub? He asked softly. I built it from nothing, Mira said, pride brightening her eyes. Grants, fundraisers, weekends painting walls. Dad called it my one-woman revolution. She laughed softly. Some days it still feels like that. Julian let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. You're incredible. Mira blushed slightly, eyes dropping to her hands. Maybe. Or maybe I just didn't have anything else. Was there? He hesitated painfully. Anyone else? She looked surprised. You mean romantically? He nodded. No, she said simply. He swallowed hard. Why not? Now her eyes softened. Because there was always someone I never really stopped loving. Her cheeks colored. Even when he was gone. Julian closed his eyes. Those words carried 15 years of weight, quiet, unadmitted devotion. When he looked at her again, his voice was barely a whisper. Mira, I didn't date anyone either. She blinked. At all. At all. The air tightened between them. Quiet. Warm. Full of unbroken threads. A child's laughter drifted out from inside the building, pulling Myra's attention back to the present. I should get back in there soon, she murmured. They have a talent for dipping entire sleeves into paint if I'm not watching. Julian smiled for the first time, truly smiled, since he'd arrived in Willow Ridge. She looked at him then, studying the smile like it was a relic she never thought she'd see again. And Julian, emboldened by the moment, spoke. There's something I want to ask you. Myra's eyebrows lifted. My 30th birthday is in 2 weeks, he said. My parents are hosting a gala. Lots of business partners, investors, politicians, the usual. Mira laughed softly. Sounds like my nightmare. He smirked. It's mine too. Her laughter softened into curiosity. So why are you telling me? Because I want you there, Julian said quietly, seriously. With me. As my guest. Mira stilled. I know it's sudden, he continued. And I know it's a different world from this. But it's important. To me. She swallowed. Julian, she said slowly, you're asking me to step into a world where people like me don't belong. That's not true. She gave him a look, tired, knowing. You know what I mean, she whispered. Your parents will be there. Julian didn't flinch. I don't care. You did once. I was a child once, he corrected. I'm not anymore. Mira looked conflicted. Fear tugged at her expression. Fear of being rejected, belittled, dismissed the way she had been by whispers in town, by kids who thought art was pointless, by people who saw her father's cafe and assumed small dreams. I don't want to embarrass you, she said softly. Julian leaned forward, voice firm. You could never embarrass me. I want the world to see you. To see the woman who changed my life before it even started. Her breath trembled. And for the first time since he returned, Mira let herself believe. Maybe he wasn't here just to revisit the past. Maybe he was here to claim a future. All right, she whispered. I'll go. Julian's relief was palpable. Warm, bright, almost disbelieving. Thank you, he said quietly. She offered a faint smile. But I'll need help. I haven't exactly been to a gala. I'll handle everything, he promised. That doesn't surprise me, she murmured with a tiny smirk. They stood. Mira hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged him. Not tightly, not desperately, but enough. Enough that Julian felt the last 15 years melt away in her arms. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining. I'm glad you came back, she said. Me too, Julian whispered. Julian walked her to her car like he used to, though they were both adults now, and the simple act felt different. Deeper. Waited. She opened the door, paused, and looked up at him. So, she said lightly, are you staying at a hotel? No, Julian said. I booked a small lodge down by Willow Creek. Her eyes widened slightly. You remember that place? I remember everything, he said softly. She flushed. When she drove away, Julian remained in the parking lot for a long time, staring at the spot where her car had been. The sun dipped behind the mountains. The wind carried the scent of pine and acrylic paint. And Julian Carter, for the first time in 15 years, felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Julian's lodge sat nestled against the water's edge, a small cabin framed by evergreens. It wasn't glamorous, nothing like his penthouse in Silvergate City, but it felt real. Solid. Honest. Inside, the furniture was simple, a stone fireplace, wooden shelves, worn armchairs. He set his duffel on the bed and exhaled, long and uneven, like he'd been holding his breath for 15 years. He looked around, unsure what to do with stillness. Silvergate never allowed stillness. It ran on deadlines, alarms, meetings. But here, the silence hummed with life. A creek outside. Crickets chirping. The wind whispering through pine needles. Julian sat on the edge of the bed. Then he took out his phone. Missed calls, 48. Text messages, 32. Emails, 112. All from Carter Aerospace or his parents. The last one from his mother read, Where are you? This is irresponsible. Call us immediately. He turned the phone face down. For once, he didn't feel obligated to answer. Julian slipped off his watch, kicked off his polished shoes, and leaned back on the bed. The scent of pine drifted in through the window. And for the first time in a decade, Julian fell asleep naturally, without exhaustion, without pressure, without a looming meeting, just the simple peace of being back home. He dreamed of Mira again. But this time, she wasn't calling him back. She was smiling at him on the patio at the Creators Hub. And this time, he didn't wake with tears. He woke with purpose. The next morning, Julian returned to Moonbeam Cafe. Mr. Lane was behind the counter again, but this time, he gave Julian a knowing look the moment he walked in. You saw her, he said. Yes, Julian replied. And Julian allowed a small smile. She agreed to come to my birthday gala. Mr. Lane blinked. Your parents' gala? Julian nodded. Well, Mr. Lane said slowly, of all the places for her to return to your life, that's definitely the lion's den. Julian gave a humorless huff. I'm aware. Mr. Lane poured him a cup of coffee, cinnamon, just like old times. You know, Mr. Lane murmured, wiping the counter. Mira always believed you'd come back one day. Even when I tried to tell her that life doesn't usually work out that neatly. Julian's chest tightened. I didn't expect her to wait. She didn't. Mr. Lane shrugged. She lived. She taught. She built something beautiful. But she left a door open in her heart. His eyes softened. Most people don't ever get that kind of love. Julian stared down into his coffee. He didn't feel like he deserved it. But he wanted to be worthy of it. I'm not leaving again, he said quietly. Mr. Lane studied him. You sure about that? You've got a whole empire waiting for you in Silvergate. Julian's jaw firmed. I didn't choose that life. It was chosen for me. Mr. Lane nodded as if he'd expected exactly that. Then I guess, he said, it's time for you to choose something for yourself. Julian hadn't realized how badly he needed to hear those words. Later that afternoon, Julian visited the only boutique in Willow Ridge, Petals and Velvet, where Mira said she'd try to find something appropriate for the gala. The moment he stepped inside, the owner, Mrs. Hartford, nearly dropped a rack of scarves. Good heavens, she gasped. Julian Carter? In my store? Julian felt his ears heat. Yes. I heard you were back, Mrs. Hartford said, bustling over. And here you are. Mira said she needed a dress for something fancy. Don't tell me it's for your birthday party. Julian cleared his throat. It is. Mrs. Hartford pressed a hand to her chest. Well, it's about time you Carter boys stopped ignoring the best girl in town. Julian blinked. Don't bother denying it, she said cheerfully. She's been the beating heart of this town since she was 12. If you're smart, you'll hold on to her. Julian found himself smiling shyly. I intend to. Well, Mrs. Hartford clapped her hands. Then let's get you two looking like the kind of couple that'll make your rich parents choke on their champagne. Julian choked. We're not, I don't know if. Mrs. Hartford waved him off. Honey, I'm old. Not blind. Julian gave up arguing. He purchased a tailored deep charcoal suit with subtle mountain-etched cufflinks. In honor of where he actually came from, Mrs. Hartford insisted. He left the boutique feeling lighter. Hopeful. Nervous. Alive. It was strange. He had faced multi-million-dollar launches without a flicker of fear. But one night with Mira at his side? That was terrifying. Because it mattered. Meanwhile, Mira stood in the fitting room staring at herself in the mirror. Mrs. Hartford had chosen a midnight blue gown for her, elegant, flowing, understated but stunning. Mira had never worn anything like it. She felt like she was looking at someone else. Someone older. Someone braver. Someone who belonged somewhere far beyond Willow Ridge. But doubt crept in. What if Julian regrets inviting me? What if his parents treat me like a charity case? What if I embarrass him? What if he leaves again? She clutched the fabric at her chest. Stop overthinking, Mrs. Hartford said from outside the curtain, as if sensing every fear. Breathe, sweetheart. Mira stepped out. Mrs. Hartford softened immediately. Oh, honey, you're going to break that boy's heart. Mira blushed. I don't want to break him. I just don't want to be hurt again. Mrs. Hartford touched her arm gently. Then trust what's right in front of you, she said. Trust the man he is now, not the boy who had no power back then. Mira nodded slowly. She didn't know if she was ready for a world of gala nights, political whispers, or billionaires' expectations. But she was ready to step toward Julian, even if her heart shook with every step. For the next week, Julian spent every morning at the art center. He fixed shelves, repaired leaky faucets, installed a new lighting system in the kids' studio, donated supplies anonymously at Myra's insistence. Mostly, though, he just watched her. How she lit up around the kids. How she solved problems with more grace than most CEOs. How she carried the weight of the town's youth on her shoulders without complaint. He wondered how anyone could have ever looked at her and seen less. Every evening, they walked to the creek and talked about childhood, about what they missed, about what they feared. Julian told her things he'd never told anyone. How close did you come to leaving Carter Aerospace? She asked one evening. Close, he admitted. But every time I got close, my parents reminded me that I owed them. Myra's eyes softened. What about what you owe yourself? Julian stared at her. Nobody had ever asked him that before. Mira stood on her porch, staring up at the mountains. Her dress was ready. Her shoes were polished. Her nerves were wildfire. She didn't hear Julian's footsteps until he was already close. "Hey," he said softly. "Can I sit?" She nodded. He sat beside her, hands clasped. "You ready for tomorrow?" he asked. "No," she laughed nervously. "Absolutely not." "Me neither." She blinked at him. "You're the guest of honor. That doesn't mean I want to be there." Mira looked at him, really looked, and saw something she had never seen in him before. Fear. Not of her. Not of the night. Of losing something important. "Julian," she whispered, "I'm not going anywhere." He closed his eyes like those words did something to him, something good and painful all at once. When he opened them, his voice was quiet. "I want you to know something before tomorrow," he said. "I brought you into that world not to show you off, not to impress anyone, but because it finally feels wrong to face it without you." Her throat tightened. "Julian. And because," he added gently, "I want them to know who I chose." Myra's breath hitched. He wasn't asking her to be his girlfriend. He wasn't rushing what they were. But he was drawing a line, claiming a truth, taking a stand. For her. For them. She leaned her head on his shoulder. And Julian let out a breath that seemed to loosen every tight, locked part of him. They stayed like that until the porch light flickered on. The next night, Mira stood in her midnight blue gown, hands trembling around her clutch. Julian waited at the bottom of the cafe steps in his charcoal suit, looking up at her as though she were the only star in the sky. "You're breathtaking," he whispered. Mira flushed. "You clean up pretty well yourself." He held out his hand. She took it, and for the first time they walked toward the Carter world. Not as children separated by circumstance, but as two adults choosing to face the unknown together. The Carter mansion in Silvergate City had always been a monument to ambition. Glass walls, white stone columns, a sweeping balcony that looked out over the glittering skyline. But on the night of Julian's 30th birthday gala, it was transformed into something impossibly grand. Cascading chandeliers, fountains of champagne, a string quartet playing classical variations of modern songs, and guests from every echelon of wealth drifting like constellations. And Julian Carter was pacing. Not the steady, self-assured pacing of a man used to big decisions. Not the careful, strategic pacing of an aerospace engineer. This was the pacing of someone whose nerves were on fire. Because he wasn't waiting for business partners or politicians. He was waiting for Mira Lane. He kept checking the entrance at the top of the double staircase, pretending to glance at the catering, the musicians, the decor. Anything but the fact that his entire heartbeat was focused on one person. "She'll come," he told himself. She said she would. But what if she changed her mind? What if? "Julian," his mother said cheerfully as she approached, "everything looks perfect, darling. Except you. You look like you're preparing for launch." Her smile was delicate but pointed. Mr. Carter joined her, already halfway through a glass of something expensive. "Relax. Investors don't like nervous hosts." Julian forced a breath. Tonight would be the moment he brought Mira into his world. Publicly, formally, unapologetically. And he wouldn't hide her. Not anymore. A soft ripple traveled through the room. Julian turned. And everything stopped. Mira stood at the top of the staircase, the soft gold lighting gathering around her like sunlight caught in motion. She wore an emerald green dress, simple, elegant, flowing down to her ankles with a slit that moved as lightly as her breath. Her long dark hair was pinned back loosely, framing the gentle lines of her face. And on her wrist, faint but still visible, were bits of bright paint she must have forgotten to scrub off. It made Julian smile. She hadn't changed. She was still Mira Lane, artist dreamer, someone who lived with color under her fingernails. For a long, suspended moment, she didn't move. The room seemed too grand, too large, too unfamiliar. But when her eyes found Julian's, something in her shoulders eased. He walked toward her slowly, as if afraid she'd vanish if he went too fast. "Mira," his voice was reverent. "You clean up well," she teased softly, though her eyes were wide, searching his face like she had to make sure he was real. "You're stunning," he breathed. "I mean beyond stunning. You're God, Mira." Her cheeks warmed. "Julian, people are staring." "Let them." For once, he meant it. He offered his arm. She took it. Something settled in him, like a promise being fulfilled. The night unfolded in slow, dazzling waves. Julian introduced her to everyone, executives, partners, philanthropists. Some greeted her kindly. Others smiled too tightly, their gazes sliding over her like an assessment. Mira felt it. Every glance. Every unspoken question. Who is she? Why is she here? Does she belong? Julian noticed the flickers of discomfort and pressed reassuringly against her hand. Breathe, he murmured once. I'm right here. I know, she whispered. But your world feels tall. Then I'll shrink it down, he said. For a while it worked. They laughed. They danced. Mira found herself relaxing, just a little, when Mr. Fincher, now semi-retired but still an honored guest, greeted her warmly. Miss Mira, he said with a bow that was only half joking, I always knew Willow Ridge would send its brightest star. She blushed. You're too kind. Not at all. Julian's never looked so alive. The older man winked. I believe congratulations are in order. Myra's brows knit. For what? Mr. Fincher only smiled and drifted away. She didn't have time to ask further. Julian was pulled into a brief conversation with investors, and Mira stepped aside to give him space. That's when she heard it. His parents' voices, low, urgent, carrying just enough to reach her where she stood behind the column. You need to reconsider, Mr. Carter hissed. There's nothing to reconsider, Julian replied, restrained but firm. His mother added, Julian, think carefully. The woman is lovely, yes, but she comes from a completely different world. She's the woman I love. The words came out like steel. Myra's breath caught. I intend to marry her, Julian finished. Silence. Then, you'll be disinherited, Mr. Carter said coldly. Every share, every inheritance trust gone. Carter Aerospace will not place its future in the hands of sentiment. Julian's voice shook, but not with fear. Then take it. I don't need any of it. Myra's chest tightened, her pulse bursting painfully. His mother gasped softly. Julian, listen to yourself. You would throw away everything we've built for a childhood sweetheart. For the only person who's ever really known me, Julian snapped. Myra's hand went to her mouth. And what about her? His mother continued. Do you think she wants this burden? Do you think she wants to be the reason you lose everything? Mira felt tears sting her vision. Because she didn't. She didn't want to be the cause of a family breaking. She didn't want Julian to lose his entire life for her. Mr. Carter spoke again, voice sharp as cut glass. End it. Tonight. Mira didn't wait to hear Julian's answer. Her legs moved before her mind did. She slipped through the side corridor, quiet, dimly lit, lined with windows, and pushed out onto the balcony that wrapped around the mansion. Mr. Fincher was there, as if he'd been waiting. Miss Mira? His voice was gentle. Tears blurred her vision. I shouldn't be here. This was a mistake. His expression softened with an understanding that only came from years of watching that family fracture itself with expectations. Come, he said quietly. There's a staff exit. You can leave without causing a scene. Thank you, she whispered. She followed him through the quiet halls, her heart breaking with every step. Just before she slipped out into the night, she looked back once. At the glittering party, at the man she loved more than she could ever say. Then she left, and the gala continued without her. Julian searched the ballroom 3 times. First politely, then anxiously, then with something close to panic simmering beneath his ribs. She wasn't with the string quartet. She wasn't near the catering tables. She wasn't talking to Mr. Fincher or the Lane family acquaintances the Carters had invited. She was simply gone. And Julian's heart went cold. He found Mr. Fincher near the gallery hallway, straightening tablecloth edges even though they didn't need it. Mr. Fincher, Julian said, voice strained. Have you seen? The older man looked up with eyes full of something vast and complicated. Empathy, worry, regret, and knowledge. Miss Mira has left, he said quietly. Julian froze. Left? Why? When? Just moments ago. Mr. Fincher hesitated. She overheard you and your parents speaking. The air punched out of Julian's lungs. Everything, the lights, the music, the hum of conversation, blurred into a distant, useless haze. She heard all of it, he whispered. I believe so, Mr. Fincher replied. I'm sorry, Julian. Julian's chest tightened, hot and aching. Mira thought she was protecting you, the butler added gently. She didn't want to be the reason you lost everything. But she is the reason I found everything, Julian said hoarsely. For a beat, neither man spoke. Then Julian turned abruptly toward the exit. Julian, his mother called, stepping into his path. Where are you? I'm going after her, he said, barely keeping his voice steady. I told you, I don't care about the inheritance. Be reasonable, his father snapped. You're being emotional. Sit down and we'll discuss. No, Julian's voice cracked like thunder. Guests turned. Music faltered. Julian didn't care. For 15 years I have done everything you ever wanted, he said, voice shaking with long damn truth. I followed every plan, every expectation. I built the career you dreamed of. I lived the life you designed. His eyes blazed. And it made me miserable. Mrs. Carter's lips parted in shock. Julian stepped back, breathing hard. I am done choosing your world over my own heart. His father's expression twisted. If you walk out that door, don't expect to come back. Then I won't, Julian said quietly. Not unless you accept the people I love. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to them. Before either parent could respond, Julian turned and strode out of the ballroom. Past stunned guests, past glittering decorations, past every useless piece of wealth he no longer cared about. Into the night. Into the choice he should have made years ago. Julian drove fast. Too fast. The roads from Silvergate City to Willow Ridge twisted through steep mountain highways, but he didn't care. His heartbeat was louder than the engine. His mind was a single burning thought. Please be home. Please be home. Please still want me. The night air tore through the crack in his window, icy and sharp. 15 years ago, he had left these mountains because he couldn't stay. Today, he was leaving everything else because he refused to lose her again. He reached Willow Ridge in just under an hour. Record time, ridiculously unsafe, fueled entirely by fear and hope. The town was quiet, its pine-scented wind whispering through the empty streets. Moonbeam Cafe's sign was off. The art center was dark. Her house, the small blue one with the mismatched porch lights, glowed faintly with one warm lamp. Julian's chest clenched. He ran to the porch. Mira sat on the wooden steps, hugging her knees, face buried. When she heard his footsteps, she didn't lift her head. Mr. Fincher told you I left, she murmured, voice thick with tears. Julian's breath broke. Mira. She finally looked at him. Even in the dim light, he could see she'd been crying for a long time. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. Where else would I be? You should be at your gala. With your parents. With your career. I don't want any of that without you. She shook her head, voice cracking. Julian, you heard them. If you stay with me, you lose everything. I only lose what I was never meant to keep. Her lips trembled. Don't say that. It's true. He stepped closer, hands shaking. The only time in my life I ever felt like myself was when I was with you. When we were kids and tonight. Mira, you're not taking anything from me. You're giving me back who I used to be. Her tears spilled again. I didn't want you to choose. I'm not choosing between worlds, he said gently, kneeling in front of her. I'm choosing you and building a world with you. Julian, you didn't ruin my life, he whispered. You saved it. A sob slipped from her. And Mira, his voice softened to the smallest, sincerest thread. I didn't lose anything tonight. I finally found home. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The boy who left, the girl who stayed, two lives shaped around one long promise neither had ever broken. Mira leaned forward first. Julian met her halfway. Their kiss was slow, trembling, years overdue. The kind that tasted like every memory they'd held on to. Every ache. Every hope. When they finally pulled apart, Mira pressed her forehead to his. What now? She whispered. Julian exhaled softly, as if the answer had always been waiting. Now, he said, we start our life. Julian found a small cottage 2 blocks from the Willow Ridge Creators Hub and moved in within the week. He dove headfirst into helping Mira repair the art center, painting walls, fixing plumbing, building shelves, installing new lighting. He built more from wood in those first 3 weeks than he had in the last decade in aerospace. Word spread through Willow Ridge quickly. Julian Carter? The billionaire heir? Working at the art center. Did you hear he left everything? For love? You're kidding. No, he's covered in paint. I saw him. Photos leaked. Blogs caught wind. News outlets picked it up. The story exploded. Heir gives up fortune to return to small town and childhood sweetheart. Instead of ridicule, the world surprisingly adored it. Humanity was hungry for sincerity. Donations came flooding in. Volunteers offered time. Kids sent drawings of Julian the helper, Miss Mira the art queen. Even Carter Aerospace employees emailed quietly, thanking him for choosing happiness. Slowly, painfully, unexpectedly, his parents came around. It took weeks before Mrs. Carter called. Months before Mr. Carter appeared in Willow Ridge. But time, paired with humility, has a way of softening stone. They visited the art center, saw the joy on the children's faces, saw the peace on their sons, and something in them cracked open. For the first time in Julian's life, his father said, "I'm proud of you." The family began stitching itself back together, not through wealth or legacy, but through the simple truth of Julian's choice. The first snow of the year arrived quietly in Willow Ridge. Soft flakes drifted down like white feathers outside the windows of the Willow Ridge Creators Hub. Catching on the edges of the rooftop, Julian had helped repair himself. Inside, the smell of acrylic paint and warm apple cider filled the air as children finished their afternoon art session. Julian stood near the doorway, sleeves rolled up, hands stained with a mix of paint colors he couldn't name. A group of kids crowded around him, proudly showing off their projects. "Mr. Julian, look, I made a rocket ship like the ones from your company." Julian grinned. "That's better than anything we ever built." The boy beamed. Quietly, Mira watched from across the room, heart swelling at the sight of Julian so effortlessly woven into a world he once believed he didn't belong in. He had changed. Or maybe he had simply become himself again. Every day since he returned had been a small act of rebuilding. Repairing the art center, helping at Moonbeam Cafe, joining town meetings, restoring old trails, fixing little things for the community without ever being asked. The townspeople adored him. The children trusted him. And Mira loved him more with every sunrise. But today felt different. Julian was distracted, fidgeting, straightening things that didn't need straightening, checking the time every few minutes. Mira noticed it, but she let him be. Julian had always needed space when he was working something out in his mind. When the last of the kids rushed out the door, shouting goodbyes, Julian turned to Mira with a breath he seemed to have held for hours. "Stay here," he said softly. She raised an eyebrow. "Julian, I'll be right back." He left before she could question him. When he returned, the windows were dark. The main lights were off. Only a soft glow filled the center, warm, golden, twinkling. Mira stepped forward, breath catching. Every part of the room was illuminated by tiny string lights, wrapped around beams, draped along the walls, reflecting off the children's art so each painting glowed as though alive. Candles flickered on the tables, their flames dancing like they, too, had been waiting for this moment. In the middle of the room, beneath a canopy of lights and colorful murals, stood Julian. Hair slightly tousled, hands trembling, eyes soft and shining. He had changed into the same white dress shirt he wore at his gala. The night everything shattered, and the night everything began again. Myra's heart thudded painfully. "Julian," she breathed. He exhaled shakily. "This place, this is where I realized who I wanted to be for the rest of my life." He walked toward her slowly. "And you," he continued, voice thick with emotion, "you're the one who made that possible. Mira, I spent 15 years trying to fill the space you left. I tried success, status, expectations. But nothing," his voice broke. "Nothing ever came close to the feeling I had when I walked you home after rehearsals." Her eyes burned. Julian swallowed, stepping close enough that she could see his hands trembling. "I wasted so many years being afraid of choosing for myself. But the moment I found my way back to you, everything fell into place. I found my home, my peace, my reason." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Mira covered her mouth, tears already spilling. Julian's voice softened to a whisper. "From the moment I met you, I loved you. And I know that now with every part of who I am." He lowered himself to one knee. The lights shimmered around them like stars. "Mira Lane, will you marry me?" Mira choked on a sob, hands shaking, breath trembling. "Yes," she whispered instantly, fiercely. "Yes, Julian. Always yes." He broke into a breathless laugh, relief crashing over him like a wave. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and Mira didn't wait. She pulled him up into her arms, kissing him with all the certainty she'd held onto for half a lifetime. Their embrace melted into the glow of the art center, surrounded by the children's paintings, the colors of the town, and the space that had carried both of their dreams. It felt like the universe had been holding this moment for them. When they told the Carters the next morning, Julian's mother cried first. It stunned everyone. She reached for Myra's hands with trembling fingers. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "For everything. For the pressure. The separation. The hurt. We were wrong." Mira blinked in surprise, but Julian squeezed her hand. His father was slower, stiff at first, but the cracks showed. His voice was low when he finally said, "Son, I'm glad you chose love. You're happier. And that matters more to me than the business." Julian stared. He had waited his whole life to hear something like that. In the following weeks, the Carter family poured support, financial and emotional, into Willow Ridge. Funds for upgrading the Willow Ridge Creators Hub. A renovation plan for Moonbeam Cafe. Donations for scholarships, supplies, and community art programs. Not because Julian asked, but because they wanted to show they were trying. Healing didn't happen overnight. But step by step, conversation by conversation, gesture by gesture, the Carter family began stitching themselves into Myra's world. And Myra's father, burly, warm-hearted Mr. Lane, accepted Julian without hesitation. "You left a whole empire for my daughter," he told Julian one morning, wiping espresso cups behind the bar. "You'll forever be family to me." Julian swallowed hard. "Thank you, sir. You can call me Dad," Mr. Lane added gruffly. Julian nearly dropped the mug in his hand. The greenhouse at the edge of Willow Ridge had once been abandoned, its glass panes fogged and cracked, its structure leaning like a tired old man. Julian and Mira restored it themselves, day by day, weekend after weekend, transforming it into something magical. On their wedding day, sunlight streamed through the sparkling glass roof, scattering iridescent colors across rows of white wildflowers and soft greenery. Children's paintings, framed and delicate, lined the aisles like blessings from the smallest hands in town. Mira walked down the aisle in a flowing gown that shimmered like fresh snow, hand in hand with her father. Julian stood waiting at the altar, dressed in a simple suit, eyes filled with love so powerful it seemed to glow. When their vows began, there wasn't a dry eye in the greenhouse. Myra's voice trembled. "You came back to me," she said. "And in doing so, you brought me back to myself. I promised to love the boy you were, the man you became, and every version of you still to come." Julian's voice was soft but steady. "You were the first person who ever truly saw me, and the only one I ever truly wanted. I promised to choose you, every day, every year, every lifetime." When they kissed, sunlight spilled through the glass like a silent blessing. Outside, Willow Ridge cheered. Inside, the world felt perfect. The morning after the wedding, Willow Ridge felt wrapped in a gentle hush, like even the mountains were giving the newlyweds a moment to breathe. Julian and Mira didn't take a lavish honeymoon. No flights, no tropical islands, no glittering resorts. Just a cabin. A small wooden cabin tucked quietly between tall pines, the same mountains they'd grown up beneath. A place Julian had found months earlier, its porch overlooking a valley that rolled like green silk in the summer. Mira stepped inside first, her dress replaced by a soft sweater, hair loose around her shoulders. The fire Julian lit crackled warmly, painting gold across her skin. "This feels like home," she whispered. Julian wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "It is," he murmured. "It always will be." They spent 3 days walking the trails, painting side by side, cooking messy meals, talking late into the night under blankets. Julian told her stories from Silvergate, the loneliness he never admitted. Mira shared her fears from the years he was gone, the moments she almost gave up hope. None of it hurt anymore. It simply became part of their thread. On their last night, Julian traced circles on her palm and said softly, "You know, I think we're going to build something extraordinary." Mira smiled. "We already are." Life settled quickly into a rhythm. Mornings at Moonbeam Cafe. Afternoons at the art center. Evenings on Julian's porch swing, wrapped in blankets, watching the sky turn rose and lavender. The town embraced them with a warmth that surprised Julian every time. He'd grown up believing that power and connections were currencies. But here, kindness mattered more than anything. And Julian had plenty of kindness to give. He taught kids about simple engineering concepts, using paper rockets and hand-built contraptions. He helped elderly neighbors repair their fences. He rebuilt benches in the local park and fixed playground swings the moment they squeaked. Mira watched all of it with quiet admiration. "You're making this town better," she told him one night. Julian touched her cheek. "No, this town made me better." It was early spring when Mira walked into the kitchen holding a small white test with shaking hands. Julian looked up from making breakfast, eggs burning slightly in the pan. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Julian froze, spatula hanging midair. "Are you?" Mira nodded, eyes filling with tears. "We're having a baby." For a moment, Julian didn't move. Then he laughed, an astonished, disbelieving, joy-filled sound. He crossed the room in 3 strides and swept her into his arms, spinning her gently as she laughed and cried all at once. "A baby," Julian whispered against her hair. "We're having a baby." They held each other for a long time, letting the enormity of it settle into their bones. Later, sitting on the couch with his hand on her stomach, Julian whispered, "I already love them." Mira smiled softly. "I know." At the first ultrasound, the doctor chuckled warmly. "Well," she said, turning the screen toward them, "I hope you two are ready." "For what?" Mira asked. 2 heartbeats, the doctor replied. "Congratulations, twins." Julian blinked. Mira gasped. And then Julian whispered, "Oh my God, we're having 2. He squeezed Myra's hand, tears gathering in his eyes. 2 babies. 2 new lives. 2 pieces of their story beginning at once. The news spread through Willow Ridge like wildfire. Mr. Lane bought every baby book the cafe customers recommended. Mrs. Carter crocheted blankets nonstop. Even Mr. Carter, stoic, hard-edged Mr. Carter, started showing up to help paint the nursery, holding tiny paintbrushes like they might break. "It's been a long time since our home had children in it," he admitted quietly one afternoon. I'm looking forward to this." Julian nearly dropped his roller. Healing, Mira thought, really did work miracles. The twins arrived on a crisp autumn morning. A boy and a girl. Julian cried first. Mira cried next. Even Mr. Fincher, who rushed from Silvergate to be there, wiped his eyes discreetly. They named the boy Luca Julian Carter, and the girl Aria Mira Carter. When Mira held them, one at each shoulder, she whispered, "You were worth everything we went through." Julian kissed her temple. Everything. Sleepless nights followed. Endless feedings. Diaper disasters. 2 babies crying in harmony like a tiny choir. But they were never alone. Mrs. Carter rocked Aria while humming lullabies. Mr. Lane bounced Luca with cafe-born expertise. Mr. Carter, awkward and stiff, read them children's books with a seriousness that made everyone smile. Family no longer looked like 2 worlds at war. It looked like healing. It looked like effort. It looked like love. On the twins' first birthday, the Carters offered to host the celebration at the estate in Silvergate City. Mira hesitated. Julian asked gently, "Do you want to?" She took a breath. "Only if we bring Willow Ridge with us." And so they did. Moonbeam Cafe catered. The Art Center kids decorated handmade banners. The greenhouse florist arranged wildflower bouquets. Half the town piled into cars and buses and followed them to Silvergate. When Mira stepped into the grand ballroom, once intimidating, once the scene of her heartbreak, she felt none of the old fear. Julian squeezed her hand as they entered, babies perched on their hips. The room filled with music, children's laughter, confetti, family, community, a blend of both worlds. The Carters welcomed everyone warmly, showing genuine care instead of forced politeness. Later, while their children slept in a crib decorated with mountain-themed blankets, Julian and Mira slipped out to the terrace. The same terrace where he once felt trapped. Tonight it felt open, hopeful, new. They leaned against the railing, watching their families talk and laugh inside. Mira whispered, "Do you realize you kept your promise?" Julian turned to her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Which one?" "The one you made when you were 15, she said softly. "You said you'd come back for me." Julian cupped her face gently, eyes warm. "I never stopped," he said. "Every road I took, somehow always led back to you." She kissed him, slow, grateful, full of every moment that brought them here. The mountain stood strong behind them. The lights glowed softly. The sounds of family blended into a single melody. And as Julian wrapped his arms around Mira, holding her and the life they built, he realized he hadn't just come back. He had finally come home. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe to Boundless Echoes for more interesting stories. We really appreciate your support. Comment where you are watching from, so we can give you a shout out. See you in our next video.